The Nguyễn family, the year of 1965, the house on Huỳnh Thúc Kháng. The early spring of 1965 carried with it both the sweetness of pie-scented winds and the quiet heaviness of change. After years of living on Yersin Street, our family was preparing for a new chapter. My father, a senior government officer responsible for veterinary health and livestock management, had been assigned a residence that reflected both his rank and the importance of his work. The house stood at 2 Huỳnh Thúc Kháng Boulevard in Đà Lạt, a residence provided by the government to high-ranking officers who served the state. It was unlike the houses most others, built in an A shape with tall glass windows. It caught the sunlight like a crisp and stood dignified among the pine trees that lined the boulevard. In the mornings, the mist of Đà Lạt curled around its edges, making it seem half hidden, as if the house itself belonged to both earth and sky. For my father, the move was more than a change of address. His duties often pulled him out of the city into the distant villages where farmers lived on the fragile balance between hope and loss. A cow struck by disease could mean hunger for an entire family. A buffalo's death could stop a season's rice planting. His job was to vaccinate herds, control outbreaks, and teach farmers to protect their animals. These tasks were not glamorous, yet they were essential to survival of countless rural households. The government recognized his responsibilities by granting him this home not as a luxury, but as a base for his demanding work. The house had a presence of quiet grace. In front, a garden bloomed with roses, dahlias, and lilies that my mother tended with her steady hands. She had always found comfort in nurturing life, whether it was a soil, the flowers, or her 12 children. Behind the main house stood a smaller dwelling, simple but sufficient, built for my father's chauffeur. His work often demanded long journeys, and a driver was necessary to take him across the winding roads that cut through mountains and valleys. Many mornings began before sunrise with the engine of government car humming in the mist, waiting to carry him into the countryside. Leaving the old house on Yersin Street was not easy. That home had been a cradle of memory, the place of new births, of children's laughter spilling into the courtyard, the daily meals shared with both noise and warmth. Yet, as we packed our belongings and walked through its familiar rooms for the last time, there was also excitement. The Huỳnh Thúc Kháng house promised more space, more light, and perhaps a breath of dignity in certain times. But 1965 was not an ordinary year. It was the year when Vietnam itself was moving, often unwillingly, into the turbulence of history. In the same year, 1965, my oldest brother Nhang lived in the family. At the heart of the family, my brother Nhang had just turned 20. To outsiders, he was a young man with the world before him. To us, he was the eldest brother, the one expected to shoulder the weight of tradition. In Vietnamese families, the oldest child often bore invisible chains of expectation to succeed, to guide, to sacrifice, to set an example. Yet, with 11 siblings behind him, Nhang often felt trapped. The responsibility was too heavy, the path too narrow. That year, with quiet resolve and the impatience of youth, he decided to leave. He wanted his own life, his own adventure, something beyond the endless cycle of helping raising young brothers and sisters. His departure was not filled with fanfare, no loud goodbyes, only a sudden echo of absence. To us younger ones, his leaving was like a stone dropped into the water, sending ripples through the household that would never fully settle. With Nhang is gone, the burden fell naturally onto my sister Thanh Tâm, then 19. She had always carried herself with a kind of quiet grace, but now her role became unmistakably maternal. She cooked, disciplined, guided, and soothed. She became for a time the second mother of the family, keeping the household steady while my parents worked and worried, but even she was restless. That same summer, my sister Thanh Tâm also left, traveling to Saigon for a summer job. She said it was only temporary, but her absence was another loss. From the 12 siblings, only 10 remained in the house, their voices mingling like birds calling in the forest, slowly thinning of its branches. At night, when the cicadas grew quiet and the city wrapped itself in mist, my mother often stood in the garden watering her flowers beneath the pale glow of moonlight. Her thoughts were not only on the roses and lilies, but on her children, some near, some far, some just beginning to wander into the uncertain world. Each bloom she tended seemed to hold a prayer, each drop of water a silent blessing. Outside of the sanctuary of our home, Vietnam in 1965 was unraveling. The assassination of Ngô Đình Diệm in November 1963 had left a wound that had not healed. Since then, one government after another had risen and fallen, coups sweeping through the capital like sudden storms. By early 1965, the turbulence had deepened. In March, the world shifted. The first American combat troops, U.S. Marines, landed in Da Nang. What had been whispered for months now became undeniable. The war was no longer a distant conflict in the jungles and rice fields. It was here. Helicopters clattered in the skies. Foreign soldiers mingled with locals. The language of war began to drown out the language of daily life. Đà Lạt, with its pine forests, French villas, and cool mountain air, still felt like a dream compared to flatlands burning with conflict. Yet, even here, whispers of fear grew louder. Refugees passed through, their faces lined with exhaustion. Students spoke in hushed voices about politics, protests, and the future. My father, though not the politician, was caught in the undercurrent of history. His work with livestock, his travels to villages, all of it now took place under the looming shadow of war. And yet, within the walls of our home on Huỳnh Thúc Kháng, life clung to its rhythm. 10 children still fill the air with laughter and quarrels. The pine trees sway, whispering ancient secrets. My mother's flower bed glowed with stubborn beauty. It was for a fleeting moment a sanctuary, fragile, yes, but real. Life inside the pine's scented walls. The Huỳnh Thúc Kháng house soon took on breadth and pulse of the family life. Its glass facades caught the morning light, and when dawn broke over Đà Lạt, it poured into the house like liquid gold. Inside, however, there was little time to stand and admire. A household of 10 children still at home moved with the rhythm of necessity. Someone fetching water, someone sweeping the yard, someone coaxing the youngest to eat breakfast before school. My father's work schedule set the tone. Some mornings, the sound of the chauffeur starting the government car was the first thing we heard. The low rumble of the engine mixing with the chorus of cicadas fading at sunrise. My father would step out of his press uniform, a folder of papers under his arm, a sense of purpose in his stride. His destination was rarely glamorous, not city meetings, but distant villages. Sometimes he carried vials of vaccines for cattle and pigs, sometimes manuals for farmers, sometimes only his knowledge and patience. Those journeys were long and often dangerous, for the countryside was no longer safe. The year 1965 was the year of the war's shadow, reached even the mountains. Villages were torn between loyalties, caught between government authority and the Viet Cong's growing presence. My father often returned tired, his uniform dusty, his face lined with the strength of navigating not only winding roads, but also the politics of the survival in contested lands. At home, my mother carried her own quiet war, the battle of raising children in uncertain times. With Nhang and Thanh Tâm gone, her task grew heavier. The younger siblings clung to her, and she, in turn, anchored them with routines, meals at the same hour, prayers whispered at night, the gentle discipline of chores. The garden became her refuge. When she knelt among her roses or lifted her face to the pine wind, she seemed to draw strength from the earth itself. The house behind the house, the chauffeur's quarters, added another layer to family life. His presence was steady but distant. He was part of the household rhythm, yet separate. His own family somewhere far away. Sometimes, when my father was gone for days, the chauffeur would sit outside in the evenings, smoking silently while the children played. He was a reminder that even within our cocoon, the wider world of adult responsibility loomed. For the children, daily life mixed play with subtle awareness of loss. We were 10 now, but not 12. At dinner, the absence of Nhan's voice were palpable. At bedtime, Thanh Tâm gentle instructions no longer filled the air. The remaining older siblings try to fill the gaps, but absence is peculiar thing. It has weight. The young ones, too innocent to fully understand, still felt it. We asked where our brother has gone and when our sister would return, but why the house felt bigger yet somehow emptier. My mother, always careful with words, reassured us. They are finding their way, but they carry this family in their hearts. The school provided structure. Each morning the children in uniforms filed down the boulevard, their books carried in cloth satchels, their chatter mingling with sound of church bells of Đà Lạt steeples. Education was my parents' greatest gift to us. Their firm belief that knowledge was a shield in uncertain times. Yet even classrooms were not free from the world's turbulence. Teachers sometimes spoke of courage, of sacrifice, of nation's needs. The older students whispered of protests, of draft notices, of American troops landing on the coast. Even in the cool air of Đà Lạt were seeped into lessons. At home, evenings were gentler. The family gathered around dinner, rice, vegetables, sometimes meat if the market had been kind. Stories flow, laughter rose, quarrels sparkle, and my mother's firm voice restored order. Afterward, the garden of veranda became a gathering place. The pine trees outside whisper like ancient guardians, and above them the night sky glittered with stars that seemed closer in Đà Lạt than anywhere else. But peace was fragile. Each radio broadcast carried news of escalation. By mid-1965, American troop numbers swelled, their presence no longer a whisper but a fact. Villages burned, refugees fled, and whispers of coups still drifted through political circles. My father rarely spoke of politics, but he furrowed brow at the dinner table, saying up. His concern was not power, but people, the farmers whose herds he vaccinated, the villagers who greeted him with both gratitude and fear, unsure whom to trust in the fractured nation. The Huỳnh Thúc Kháng home became, in many ways, both a fortress and fragile shell. The children's laughter filled its rooms, yet silence lingered in corners where absent lived. The glass walls reflected sunlight, yet they also reminded us how transparent and delicate life could be. 1965 was not kind to Vietnam. In Saigon, governments rose and fell. In Central Highlands, battles flared. In coastal plains, American planes thundered overhead. Yet in Đà Lạt, nest among hills and pines, our family tried to live a semblance of normal life. And still, beneath the surface, the air was thick with waiting for father to return from his journeys, waiting for letters from Saigon, waiting for news, good or bad, that might change everything overnight. The Huỳnh Thúc Kháng house was not merely a home, it was a mirror of Vietnam itself in 1965, beautiful yet unsettled, dignified yet fragile, alive with children yet shallow by uncertainty. To be